Drummerly.com Unlimited Drama Series.
The wrench slipped from my sweaty palm for the third time, clanging against the concrete garage floor like a death knell for my weekend plans. My 5-year-old son Danny's bike lay sprawled before me, its training wheels more twisted than my marriage had become over the past 6 months. "Daddy, is it fixed yet?" Danny's voice carried that particular whine reserved for broken promises and delayed gratification. "Almost, buddy." I wiped grease from my hands with an old t-shirt, squinting through the garage door at the golden September sunset, painting our pristine suburban street. 2 months in this house, and I still felt like an imposter among the manicured lawns and luxury SUVs. That's when I noticed him, the old guy from next door, standing at the property line like some weathered scarecrow. Gerald Hoffman, retired cop, according to our realtor's gossip. Mid-60s, gray stubble, eyes that missed nothing. He'd been watching my wife Sarah play catch with Danny in the backyard for the past 10 minutes, and something about his expression made my skin crawl. "Evening, neighbor." His voice carried the gravel of too many cigarettes and not enough sleep. "Mind if I ask you something personal?" I straightened, every suburban dad instinct screaming caution. "Shoot." "Your wife's maiden name, what was it?" The question hit me like a slap. "Excuse me?" Gerald stepped closer, his weathered hands trembling slightly. "Sarah, before you married her, what was her last name?" "Winters." The word left my mouth before my brain could engage. "Why the hell would you—" His face went white as fresh paint. Without another word, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping, folded and refolded so many times the creases had worn through in places. "Take your son and run." He pressed the clipping into my palm. "Don't tell her why. Just go. Tonight." My hands shook as I unfolded the brittle paper. The headline screamed up at me in bold black letters: "Mother kills 5-year-old son on his birthday." Below it, a grainy photo of a woman being led away in handcuffs. The caption read, "Margaret Sretnew, 28, charged with first-degree murder." Sretnew. Winters spelled backwards. The world tilted sideways. Blood rushed in my ears like a freight train. This has to be some kind of mistake. Sarah would never— The boy was 5. Gerald's voice cut through my denial like a rusty blade. "Same age as your Danny. Same birthday. October 15th. My son's birthday, next week." "Mike? What's going on out here?" Sarah's voice made us both jump. She stood in the garage doorway, her lawyer-perfect posture radiating the kind of confidence that had first attracted me 8 years ago. Tonight, it felt predatory. Her green eyes locked onto the newspaper clipping in my hands, and I watched the color drain from her face like water from a broken dam. "Where did you get that?" Her voice barely qualified as a whisper. "Just some old trash I found," I managed, folding the clipping quickly. But not quickly enough. Sarah's hand shot out and snatched it away with the reflexes of a striking snake. "This is ridiculous." She forced a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Some tabloid nonsense from decades ago. Gerald, you really shouldn't be spreading this kind of garbage around the neighborhood." Gerald's eyes never left her face. "Margaret Sretnew was your aunt, wasn't she, Sarah?" "I have no idea what you're talking about." But her hands were shaking as she tore the clipping into pieces, letting them flutter to the garage floor like dying leaves. Sleep became a foreign concept that night. I lay beside Sarah, listening to her breathing, studying the familiar curve of her shoulder in the darkness. Every soft sound she made sent electricity through my nervous system. When she rolled over at 2 a.m., I nearly jumped out of my skin. Margaret Sretnew. Winters backwards. The coincidence felt too precise, too calculated. But Sarah had always been clever. Clever enough to graduate law school summa cum laude. Clever enough to make partner at 34. Clever enough to hide whatever darkness lived behind those green eyes. By morning, I'd made my decision. I waited until Sarah left for work, kissed Danny goodbye as my mother-in-law picked him up for their weekly museum trip, then walked next door. Gerald answered on the first knock, as if he'd been waiting. "Coffee?" He led me through a house that felt more like a bunker, newspapers stacked everywhere, police scanners crackling softly, windows covered with thick curtains. "Tell me about Margaret Sretnew." He poured 2 cups of coffee that could have stripped paint. "Killed her boy with sleeping pills mixed into his birthday cake." Made it look like an accident at first. Told everyone he'd gotten into her prescription medication. But the autopsy showed enough sedatives to drop a horse. Why? Insurance money. Life policy on the kid worth 200 grand. She was in debt up to her eyeballs, facing bankruptcy. Gerald settled into a worn recliner surrounded by case files. But here's the thing. She had a sister, younger by about 10 years. My coffee cup rattled against the saucer. Sarah's mother, Dorothy Winters, died in a car accident when Sarah was 16. Single vehicle crash on a rainy night, no witnesses. Another insurance payout. The implications crawled up my spine like ice-cold fingers. You think it runs in the family? I think your wife has been planning this for a long time. New house, new neighborhood, fresh start. Danny's 5th birthday next week. Same age as Margaret's victim. You got life insurance on the boy? The question hit me like a physical blow. 200,000. Sarah insisted on it when we bought the house. Said it was responsible parenting. Gerald's expression told me everything I needed to know. That afternoon, I did something I'd never imagined myself capable of. I followed my wife. Sarah's law office occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown high-rise. I parked across the street and waited, feeling like a character in one of those noir films she claimed to hate. At 5:30, she emerged with a man I didn't recognize. Tall, expensive suit, the kind of confident swagger that screamed money and privilege. They didn't go to dinner. They went to the Sunset Motel on Highway 9, a place that rented rooms by the hour. I sat in my Honda Civic, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white, watching my wife of 8 years disappear into room 237 with her lover. The betrayal felt almost anticlimactic after the morning's revelations. Of course she was having an affair. Of course she was planning to kill our son. Of course my entire life was built on lies. But I'd always been better at action than wallowing. I waited until they'd been inside for 30 minutes, then walked to the parking lot. The man's car was easy to spot, a silver BMW with vanity plates reading, Lawman. Cute. I pulled out my pocket knife and methodically punctured all 4 tires, the hiss of escaping air surprisingly therapeutic. For good measure, I left a note under the windchipper. Try running now, Romeo. A concerned citizen. The motel's back exit led to an alley that connected to a residential street. I'd made it 3 blocks before I heard shouting behind me. In my rearview mirror, I could see a tall figure in a disheveled suit standing next to the crippled BMW, gesturing wildly. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. I deleted the message and drove home, already planning my next move. His name is Daniel Morrison, Gerald said, sliding a manila folder across his kitchen table. Sarah's law partner. Divorced last year, pays alimony to 2 ex-wives. Expensive tastes, expensive habits. I flipped through the folder. Printouts from social media, public records, even a few surveillance photos Gerald had apparently taken with a telephoto lens. You've been busy. 40 years as a cop teaches you a few things about gathering intelligence. Gerald refilled our coffee cups. Morrison's got gambling debts. Big ones. Word is, he's been skimming from client accounts to cover his losses. And Sarah knows? Sarah's been covering for him, moving money around, doctoring paperwork. She's in it up to her neck. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Sarah needed money, enough to disappear, start fresh somewhere else. Danny's life insurance would provide the seed money, but she'd need more, a lot more. There's something else, Gerald continued. I did some digging. Into your finances. Sarah's been moving money out of your joint accounts for months. Small amounts, nothing you'd notice immediately. But it adds up to about $30,000. My hands clenched into fists. She's been planning this since before we moved here. Looks that way. That evening, I confronted Sarah over dinner. Not directly, I wasn't ready to show my cards yet. Instead, I probed gently, watching her reactions. How's work been lately? You seem stressed. Just the usual partner politics? She didn't meet my eyes, focusing intently on cutting Danny's chicken into precise squares. Daniel's been having some personal issues, divorce stuff. Must be hard, watching a friend go through that. Her knife slipped, scraping against the plate, with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. We're not that close. Danny looked up from his meal. Mommy, why were you crying in the car yesterday? Sarah's face went rigid. I wasn't crying, sweetheart. Mommy just had something in her eye. But I'd seen the flash of panic in her expression, the way her hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass. She was falling apart, and she knew it. After dinner, while Sarah gave Danny his bath, I accessed our home computer and began my own investigation. Sarah thought she was clever, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd used our shared laptop for everything. Her email history painted a picture that made my blood run cold. Messages to Daniel stretching back 6 months, initially professional but growing increasingly intimate. References to solving our problems permanently. Most damning of all, a series of exchanges about Danny's birthday party. Make sure Mike handles all the food prep, one message read. I'll take care of the cake. Another, the policy pays double for accidental death. We just need to be patient. And finally, sent just 3 days ago. Everything's in place. After next weekend, we'll be free. I printed everything, my hands shaking with rage. Sarah wasn't just planning to murder our son. She was going to frame me for it. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day setting traps. Gerald helped me install hidden cameras throughout the house. Tiny devices no bigger than shirt buttons, connected to a cloud storage system Sarah would never think to check. You sure you want to go through with this? Gerald asked as we positioned the final camera in Danny's bedroom. Once you start down this road, there's no going back. She's going to kill my son. The words tasted like poison in my mouth. I'm not going to let that happen. That afternoon, I picked Danny up from school early and took him to the park. We threw a frisbee, fed ducks at the pond, had ice cream from the vendor truck. Normal father-son activities that felt precious now, weighted with the knowledge of what Sarah was planning. Daddy, are you sad? Danny asked as we sat on a bench, watching other families enjoy the autumn sunshine. Why would you think that, buddy? You keep hugging me extra tight, like when Grandpa was sick. My heart broke a little more. I just love you very much, Danny. More than anything in the whole world. I love you too, Daddy. Even more than dinosaurs. Coming from a 5-year-old, there was no higher praise. That evening, Sarah announced she'd be working late again. I waited until her car disappeared around the corner, then loaded Danny into my Honda. Where are we going, Daddy? To visit Gerald next door. He wants to show you his old police badges. Gerald had prepared for our arrival. His living room was transformed. Toys scattered around, cartoons queued up on his ancient television, a plate of cookies on the coffee table. You stay here with Gerald for a little while, okay, buddy? Daddy has some work to do. I kissed Danny's forehead, breathing in the scent of his strawberry shampoo, and headed back to our house to wait. Sarah returned at 11:30, reeking of expensive cologne that wasn't mine. She moved through the house with practiced silence, checking on Danny's empty bedroom without turning on the lights. I waited until she'd settled into bed before making my entrance. Where's Danny? She asked, trying to sound casual. Safe. I turned on the bedroom lights and pulled out my phone. Want to see something interesting? I played the audio recording I'd captured that afternoon. Sarah on the phone with Daniel, discussing the final details of their plan. The birthday party's perfect cover, her recorded voice filled the room. Everyone will see Mike handling the food. When Danny gets sick, all the evidence will point to him. Negligent father, maybe some kind of breakdown. We'll be the grieving mother and supportive friend. Sarah's face cycled through a dozen emotions. Shock, fear, anger, calculation. That's not... You're taking it out of context? Really? I played another recording. How about this one? Once Mike's in prison and Danny's gone, we can access the insurance money and disappear. Maybe somewhere tropical. You always said you wanted to practice law in the Caribbean. The color drained from her face completely. Mike, let me explain. Explain what? How you've been planning to murder our son? How you've been stealing from our accounts? How you've been screwing Daniel Morrison for the past 6 months? Her mask finally slipped completely. The woman I'd married, the mother who'd sung lullabies to our baby, disappeared. What remained was something cold and calculating, a predator backed into a corner. You have no idea what you're dealing with, she said quietly. Daniel has connections, people who can make problems disappear. If you try to expose us, you'll what? Kill me too? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Too late, Sarah. Gerald's already contacted his old friends at the police department. They're very interested in the Margaret Sretnew connection.
Don't leave. Let me explain.
Explain a shade I don't own.
Watch more on Grammarly.com.
For the first time since I'd known her, Sarah looked genuinely terrified. The next morning brought chaos. Sarah was gone when I woke up. Her clothes, her laptop, even her toothbrush had vanished. But she'd left something behind. A note on the kitchen counter. You win this round, but Danny's still my son too. This isn't over. S. I called Gerald immediately. She's run. Not far, he said grimly. Morrison's BMW is still in his driveway, and I may have disabled it last night. Brake lines are tricky things. Sometimes they just fail. Within an hour, my phone started ringing. First, Sarah's mother, crying about how I was keeping her from her grandson. Then, Sarah's sister from Portland, demanding to know why I was spreading lies about their family. Finally, Daniel Morrison himself. We need to talk. His voice was tight with barely controlled panic. Somewhere private. I don't think so. You don't understand. Sarah's lost it completely. She's talking about taking Danny and disappearing. I never signed up for kidnapping. But you signed up for murder. A long silence. Meet me at Riverside Park in 1 hour. Come alone, or I call in some favors, and you disappear permanently. I hung up and immediately called Gerald. It's time. Riverside Park stretched along the Willamette River, popular with joggers and families during the day, but nearly empty at dusk. I arrived early and positioned myself on a bench overlooking the water, Gerald's backup plan already in motion. Daniel appeared right on schedule, looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled. Where's Sarah? I asked. Motel outside the city. She's completely unhinged, Mike. Talking about how you've ruined everything, how Danny would be better off dead than raised by you. And you're just an innocent bystander? He sat down heavily beside me. Look, the affair was stupid, okay? But I never wanted anyone to get hurt. The insurance thing was Sarah's idea. She said it would look like an accident, that no one would ever suspect. Suspect what, exactly? Walk me through it. Daniel's hands shook as he lit a cigarette. Birthday party. Sarah makes the cake, adds something to make Danny sick. Not enough to kill him, just enough to send him to the hospital. But then, while he's weak, another dose. Something untraceable. Everyone thinks it's a tragic accident. Kid gets into medicine cabinet, takes too much. And I take the blame. Sarah said you'd been acting strange lately. Depression, work stress. Easy to sell the narrative of a father who made a terrible mistake. The casual way he discussed murdering my son made my vision go red. You psychotic piece of... I know how it sounds. Daniel threw his cigarette into the river. But Sarah can be very persuasive, and I owe some very dangerous people a lot of money. The insurance payout would have solved both our problems. Where is she now? Starlight Motel, room 18. But Mike, you need to understand. She's not the woman you married anymore. Whatever's left of Sarah is gone. What's left is something else entirely. I stood up, pulling out my phone. Gerald? He's here. Yes, everything's recorded. Daniel's face went white. You son of a bitch. You're wearing a wire? Better than that. I pointed to the trees surrounding the park, where small lights were blinking. Cameras, audio equipment. Gerald's old police buddies have been documenting this entire conversation. Daniel lunged at me, but 8 years of marriage to a woman planning to murder my child had taught me a few things about self-preservation. I sidestepped his clumsy attack and watched him sprawl face first into the dirt. "You're finished," he gasped, struggling to his feet. "Both of you." Sarah's got insurance of her own. Photos, recordings, evidence that'll destroy your life. I'm counting on it. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Daniel heard them too and broke into a run, crashing through the underbrush like a panicked deer. He didn't get far. Gerald emerged from behind a maintenance shed, moving with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd spent decades chasing criminals. One perfectly timed clothesline later, Daniel was face down in the grass, with Gerald's knee pressed against his spine. "Daniel Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and being a general piece of garbage." The actual police arrived moments later, led by Detective Maria Santos, Gerald's former partner. She took one look at the scene and shook her head. "Gerald, you're supposed to be retired." "I am retired. This is just a hobby." The Starlight Motel squatted beside Highway 99 like a concrete tumor, its neon sign flickering weakly in the gathering dusk. Room 18 was on the ground floor, curtains drawn tight, a sliver of yellow light visible beneath the door. Detective Santos had wanted to handle this part officially, but I'd convinced her to let me try first. Sarah was still Danny's mother, still my wife, and some part of me hoped we could end this without more violence. I knocked softly. "Sarah, it's Mike. We need to talk." The door opened a crack, revealing one green eye and a slice of pale face. "Where's Danny?" "Safe. Somewhere you'll never find him." The door swung wide. Sarah stood there in clothes she'd worn for 2 days, her perfect lawyer facade completely shattered. The woman I'd fallen in love with was gone, replaced by something feral and desperate. "You destroyed everything," she whispered. 8 years of marriage, my career, my future. All for what? A self-righteous moral stand? "I saved our son's life." "Our son?" She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Danny was never part of the plan, Mike. He was an accident, a complication I've been trying to fix for 5 years. The words hit me like physical blows. "You never wanted him." "I wanted the insurance money. I wanted the sympathy." Poor Sarah, losing her child so tragically young. Daniel and I could have built something beautiful on that foundation. "Built on Danny's grave," she shrugged. "Children die every day. At least his death would have served a purpose." I stared at the stranger wearing my wife's face and felt the last vestiges of love die in my chest. "You're sick, Sarah. Genuinely, clinically sick." "I'm practical. Something you never understood." She stepped closer, and I caught the scent of alcohol on her breath. "But it's not too late. Danny's still young, still vulnerable. Accidents happen all the time." "Not anymore. Detective Santos has everything. The recordings, the financial records, Daniel's confession. It's over." Sarah's expression shifted, cycling through rage, desperation, and finally a cold calculation that made my skin crawl. "You think you've won? You have no idea what I'm capable of." She reached behind her back, and my blood turned to ice as I saw the gun in her hand, a small silver revolver that caught the motel's neon light. "Sarah, I won't go to prison, Mike, and I won't let you raise my son to hate me." Her voice was eerily calm now, the voice she used in court when delivering closing arguments. "This ends tonight, one way or another." The gun swung toward me, and time slowed to a crawl. I dove sideways as the first shot shattered the motel's window behind me. The second shot went wide as I rolled behind a parked car. "Sarah, stop! The police are already here." "Good," she screamed. "Let them watch." I heard footsteps running across the parking lot, Detective Santos and her backup, shouting commands. But Sarah wasn't listening anymore. She'd stepped fully outside now, the gun held in both hands, searching for a clear shot. "Drop your weapon," Santos commanded from behind the cover of her patrol car. "Mrs. Patterson, put the gun down now." "My name is Sarah Winters," Sarah shouted back, "and I'm finishing what my family started." She fired 3 more shots in rapid succession. One at me, two at the police cars. Then I heard the distinctive click of an empty chamber. Sarah stared at the useless gun in her hands for a moment, her face cycling through confusion and rage. Then, she threw it aside and reached into her jacket pocket, pulling out a small pill bottle. "If I can't have my son," she said loud enough for everyone to hear, "then no one can." She dumped the pills into her palm, a dozen small white tablets that looked exactly like the ones Margaret Sretnew had used on her 5-year-old nephew 30 years ago. "Sarah, no!" I started to stand, but Detective Santos grabbed my arm. "Stay down. She's made her choice." Sarah looked directly at me as she swallowed the pills, her green eyes holding mine with an intensity that was almost hypnotic. "Tell Danny his mother loved him, in my own way." She collapsed 10 seconds later, convulsing briefly before going still. The paramedics worked on her for 20 minutes, but we all knew it was too late. Sarah had planned her final revenge perfectly, leaving me to explain to our son why his mother was never coming home. 3 months later, I sat in Gerald's living room, while Danny played with a set of toy police cars on the carpet. The old cop had become something like a grandfather to my son, filling a void that Sarah's family, what was left of it, wanted nothing to do with. "The trial starts next week," I said, watching Daniel Morrison's face on the evening news. His expensive lawyer was claiming diminished capacity, arguing that Sarah had manipulated him into the conspiracy. "He'll get 15 to 20, Gerald said confidently. "Santos built an airtight case. The recordings alone are enough to convict." Danny looked up from his toys. "Daddy, when is Mommy coming home?" The question still felt like a knife in my chest, even after 3 months of therapy sessions and carefully crafted explanations. "Remember what we talked about, buddy? Mommy got very sick and the doctors couldn't make her better. But she's in heaven now, right, with Grandma Dorothy?" "That's right." I pulled him onto my lap, breathing in the scent of his strawberry shampoo. "She's watching over you from heaven." It was a lie, of course. Sarah had died exactly as she'd lived. Selfishly, violently, without a thought for the son she was leaving behind. But Danny was 5 years old, and he deserved whatever innocence I could preserve. Gerald muted the television and looked at me seriously. "You ever wonder if you could have saved her? Done something different?" "Every day." I held Danny closer. But then I remember what she was planning to do to him, and I know I made the right choice. "Margaret Sretnew spent 12 years in prison before they executed her," Gerald said quietly. 12 years of appeals, interviews, psychological evaluations. You know what she said right before they flipped the switch? I didn't want to know, but I asked anyway. What? I should have started with the husband. Sarah heard that story growing up, learned from her aunt's mistakes. She wasn't going to leave any witnesses. The implications settled over me like a cold blanket. Sarah hadn't just been planning to kill Danny. She'd been planning to kill me too, eventually. Frame me for Danny's murder, then arrange some kind of accident while I was awaiting trial. "You saved both your lives," Gerald continued. "Don't ever forget that." Danny had fallen asleep in my arms, his toy police car still clutched in one small fist. I carried him to his bedroom, the same room where Sarah had planned his death, and tucked him under his dinosaur blankets. "Sweet dreams, buddy," I whispered, kissing his forehead. "Daddy's going to keep you safe. Always." As I turned off the lights and closed his door, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The man looking back at me was older, harder, marked by experiences no husband and father should have to endure. But he was also stronger, more determined, and absolutely committed to protecting the innocent child sleeping down the hall. Sarah had been wrong about one thing. I wasn't the same man she'd married 8 years ago. The naive, trusting fool who'd believed in fairy tale marriages and happily ever after was gone, replaced by someone who understood that evil could wear a familiar face and sleep beside you for years without you ever knowing. But that was okay. The world was a dangerous place, full of predators who looked like soccer moms and successful lawyers. Danny would need a father who understood that reality, someone who could teach him to recognize the monsters hiding behind pretty smiles and loving words. I walked back to the living room where Gerald was cleaning his service revolver, with the methodical precision of a man who'd spent 40 years preparing for the worst. "Thank you," I said simply. He looked up from his work. "For what?" "For saving my son's life." for believing me when no one else would, for being the kind of neighbor everyone should have. Gerald nodded once, then returned to his weapon. Evil's everywhere, Mike. Sometimes it moves in next door. Sometimes it shares your bed. The trick is recognizing it before it's too late. I thought about Sarah's final words, her claim that she'd loved Danny in her own way. Maybe that was true. Maybe in her twisted mind, she'd convinced herself that murder was an act of love, that death was better than the life she imagined he'd have without her. But love doesn't plan birthday parties with poisoned cake. Love doesn't steal money from college funds. Love doesn't point guns at police officers while threatening to harm innocent children. Whatever Sarah had felt for Danny, it wasn't love. It was possession, control, the desperate need to own something completely, even if ownership meant destruction. Danny stirred in his sleep, calling out for his daddy. I went to him immediately, soothing his nightmare with gentle words and protective promises. This was love, putting his needs above my own, sacrificing my comfort for his security, choosing his future over my